The spiritual internet has turned raising your vibration into a morning routine. Meditate for 10 minutes, repeat affirmations, drink lemon water, think positive thoughts, and somehow your entire energetic frequency shifts upward. It sounds clean, it sounds achievable, and Carl Jung would have called it one of the most elegant forms of self-deception the modern world has ever produced. Because what most people mean when they say vibrate higher is actually feel better without changing anything fundamental about how I'm living. And that's not raising your vibration, that's spiritual anesthesia. Jung spent decades working with patients who were desperate to evolve, to become more conscious, to access what he called the self, the deeper organizing intelligence beneath the ego. And what he found was that genuine elevation of consciousness had almost nothing to do with what the spiritual marketplace was selling. The people who actually transformed, who genuinely shifted the frequency of their entire existence, didn't get there through morning routines or positive thinking. They got there through psychological processes so counterintuitive that most people reject them immediately. Because real vibrational elevation doesn't feel like ascending into light. It feels like descending into everything you've spent your life avoiding, and then coming back up different. Jung's framework for genuine transformation wasn't abstract or mystical. It was grounded in decades of observation about what actually changes a human being at the deepest level. He watched thousands of patients try every shortcut available. He saw what worked and what was just performance. And the gap between the two was enormous. The things that actually raised someone's psychological and energetic frequency were precisely the things that the spiritual marketplace would never sell because they're uncomfortable, demanding, and impossible to package into a weekend workshop. Today I'm going to show you the 5 things Jung identified that genuinely elevate your consciousness and transform how you move through the world. These aren't gentle suggestions. They're psychological imperatives that Jung observed in every single person who achieved real transformation. And if you're willing to actually do them, instead of just understanding them intellectually, they will change the fundamental frequency of your life in ways that no affirmation or meditation practice ever could. The first thing you must do is reclaim what you've buried in your shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow is probably the most misunderstood idea in popular psychology right now. People treat shadow work like journaling about their feelings or acknowledging they sometimes get angry. That's not shadow work. That's barely scratching the surface of what Jung meant. Your shadow contains every quality, impulse, desire, and capacity you've decided is unacceptable about yourself, the rage you won't admit to, the selfishness you perform away, the ambition you've disguised as humility, the sexuality you've shamed into silence, the cruelty you're capable of but refuse to acknowledge, all of it living in your unconscious, consuming massive amounts of energy just to stay hidden. Jung discovered that repression is the single greatest drain on a person's psychological energy. Every quality you push into your shadow doesn't disappear. It takes up residence in your unconscious and requires constant energy to keep suppressed. Think about someone who grew up being told that anger was dangerous, that nice people don't get mad. That person didn't eliminate their anger. They just forced it underground. And now they spend enormous psychological resources every single day making sure that anger doesn't surface. They're polite when they should be fierce. They accommodate when they should confront. They smile when their entire body is screaming no. And they wonder why they're exhausted all the time, despite doing everything right. Jung found that reclaiming shadow material immediately liberated trapped energy. When you stop spending resources hiding parts of yourself, that energy becomes available for living. The patient who finally acknowledged their anger didn't become violent. They became alive. The person who admitted their ambition didn't become ruthless. They became directed. The individual who faced their capacity for darkness didn't become evil. They became whole. And wholeness vibrates at a frequency that fragmentation never can. No matter how many affirmations you repeat while keeping half of yourself locked in a basement. The practice isn't comfortable. It means sitting with the parts of yourself you've been running from and saying, "This is also me." It means recognizing that you're capable of everything you judge in others, that the qualities you despise in people around you are qualities you carry but refuse to own. Jung would tell you that the fastest way to raise your vibration isn't to add something spiritual to your life. It's to stop wasting energy hiding from yourself. The second thing you must do is withdraw your projections. This is where Jung's framework becomes genuinely revolutionary because most people have no idea how much of their reality is manufactured by their own unconscious. Projection, in Jung's observation, is the mechanism by which everything you can't face in yourself gets assigned to someone else. You can't acknowledge your own manipulation, so you see manipulators everywhere. You won't face your own neediness, so you're surrounded by needy people who drain you. You refuse to own your judgmental nature, so the world feels full of people judging you. Jung documented that projection doesn't just distort your perception of individual people, it distorts your entire experience of reality. When you're heavily projecting, you're not actually interacting with the world as it is. You're interacting with a world your unconscious has constructed to keep your shadow material externalized. And that constructed reality keeps you trapped in patterns that seem to come from outside you, but are actually being generated from within. Think about someone who keeps attracting the same type of toxic relationship. They believe they're unlucky, or that all the good ones are taken. But Jung would look at this pattern and see projection operating at full force. Something in that person's shadow is selecting for exactly the dynamic that their unconscious needs to externalize. They're not victims of bad luck. They're unconsciously engineering situations that mirror their internal landscape. And until they withdraw that projection, until they look at what inside them keeps creating this pattern, no amount of positive thinking will change the external reality. Because the external reality isn't the source of the problem. Withdrawing projections means asking the most uncomfortable question available. Every time you have a strong reaction to someone, intense admiration, intense hatred, intense attraction, intense repulsion, you ask yourself what this person is carrying for you. What quality in them are you refusing to see in yourself? What are they showing you about your own shadow that you'd rather not face? This doesn't mean every reaction is projection, but Jung found that the intensity of the reaction is usually proportional to the amount of projection involved. The people who trigger you most are almost always carrying your disowned material. And reclaiming that material from them doesn't just change how you see them. It changes the frequency of every relationship you have, because you stop requiring other people to carry parts of yourself you won't hold. If you're starting to feel the weight of those questions, if you're realizing how much energy you've been spending carrying other people's material instead of facing your own, the True Self-Discovery Guide walks you through exactly this process. 24 reflection exercises built on Jung's framework to help you withdraw what you've been projecting and reclaim what you've been hiding. It's in the description. The third thing you must do is dismantle your persona and stop performing who you think you should be. Jung called the persona the mask we wear for the world, the curated version of ourselves designed to be acceptable, likable, successful, spiritual, whatever identity we've decided will earn us belonging. Everyone has a persona. That's not the problem. The problem is when you've become so identified with your persona that you've forgotten there's someone real underneath it. When the performance has consumed the performer, and you genuinely don't know who you are when you stop performing. Jung observed this in some of his most accomplished patients, people who had built entire lives around a persona, the successful professional, the devoted parent, the spiritual seeker, the helpful friend, and then one day the persona cracked, maybe through burnout, illness, loss, or just the accumulated weight of pretending. And underneath was a stranger, someone they'd never met because they'd been too busy performing to ever sit with who they actually were. That crack terrified them, but Jung recognized it as the beginning of genuine transformation, because you can't vibrate at your authentic frequency while broadcasting a manufactured one. Imagine you're a radio station. Your persona is broadcasting on one frequency. The one you've calculated will attract the most listeners, the most approval, the most safety. But your authentic self vibrates at a completely different frequency, and as long as the persona is blasting, no one can hear the real signal, including you. You've been drowning out your own truth with a performance so convincing that you forgot it was a performance. Dismantling the persona means turning down that manufactured broadcast and letting the real signal emerge. This is terrifying because the real signal might not be popular. It might not attract the same people. It might change everything about your social world. Jung found that patients who began dismantling their persona went through a period that looked like social regression. They lost friends. They became uncomfortable at gatherings that used to feel natural. They couldn't maintain conversations that required their old performance. People around them said things like, "You've changed," or "What happened to you?" and meant it as concern, but the patient heard it as confirmation that the mask was finally coming off. And on the other side of that uncomfortable dismantling was something Jung valued above almost everything else: authenticity. The capacity to exist in the world as who you actually are, rather than who you've calculated you need to be. And authenticity generates a frequency that no performance can match because it resonates with something real instead of something constructed. The fourth thing you must do is stop avoiding necessary suffering. This one directly contradicts almost everything the spiritual marketplace teaches. The message out there is clear. Suffering is optional. Pain is resistance. If you're hurting, you're doing something wrong. Raise your vibration and suffering dissolves. Think positive and pain can't touch you. And Jung found this ideology actively dangerous because it teaches people to bypass the exact experiences that would transform them. Jung made a distinction that's been almost completely lost in modern spirituality. He separated neurotic suffering from legitimate suffering. Neurotic suffering is the pain we create through our own unconscious patterns, the drama we generate, the conflicts we manufacture, the wounds we keep reopening by refusing to face them. This suffering is unnecessary and perpetuated by avoidance. But legitimate suffering is the pain that comes from genuine growth, unavoidable loss, confrontation with truth, and the dismantling of illusions that no longer serve you. This suffering is not only necessary, It's the primary mechanism through which consciousness expands. Think about someone going through the grief of recognizing that their parent was never capable of the love they needed. That grief is devastating. It's not a vibration problem. It's not something affirmations can fix. It's a legitimate suffering that must be moved through fully, because on the other side of it is freedom from a lifetime of trying to earn something that was never available. The person who bypasses that grief, who reframes it as everything happens for a reason or they did their best before actually feeling the loss, doesn't transcend the pain. They bury it. And buried pain doesn't raise your vibration. It lowers it permanently because now you're spending energy avoiding something that needed to be felt. Jung observed that his patients who genuinely transformed had all been through periods of significant suffering that they didn't try to escape. They sat in the grief. They felt the rage. They experienced the disillusionment fully. And that complete experience metabolized the pain into something else. Wisdom, depth, compassion, genuine strength. Not the performed strength of someone pretending they're fine. The real strength of someone who's been through darkness and came back with their eyes open. Every person who's genuinely elevated their consciousness will tell you the same thing. The elevation came through the valley, not around it. Jung warned that the spiritual marketplace's obsession with avoiding suffering was creating generations of people who were energetically stagnant precisely because they kept circumventing the experiences designed to transform them. The practice here is radical acceptance of necessary pain. When legitimate suffering arrives, grief, disillusionment, the death of an identity, the loss of a relationship that needed to end, you don't reach for spiritual tools to make it stop. You let it do what it came to do. You feel it completely. You trust that the suffering has intelligence even when it feels like destruction. And you allow it to reshape you into someone who carries more truth and less illusion. That reshaping is vibrational elevation. Not the comfortable kind, the real kind. The fifth thing you must do is choose consciousness over comfort in every area where you've been choosing comfort over truth. This is the one that ties everything together, and it's the one Jung considered most essential. Because ultimately, vibrational frequency in Jung's framework isn't about energy or metaphysics. It's about how much truth you can hold. How much reality you can face without flinching. How much of your actual experience you can acknowledge without needing to distort it into something more palatable. Jung recognized that most people live in a carefully managed bubble of selective awareness. They see what's comfortable. They acknowledge what's manageable. They engage with the parts of reality that don't threaten their existing identity. And everything else gets filtered out, denied, rationalized, or projected onto others. This selective awareness creates a low-frequency existence because you're only operating with a fraction of available information. You're making decisions based on partial reality. You're building a life on foundations you haven't actually examined. And the energy required to maintain all that filtering keeps you operating at a fraction of your capacity. Choosing consciousness means dismantling the filters. It means looking at your relationships and seeing them as they actually are, not as you need them to be. It means examining your career and acknowledging whether it aligns with your values or just your fear. It means facing your family dynamics honestly, instead of maintaining the mythology that everyone's fine. It means admitting when you're wrong, recognizing when you're afraid, and acknowledging when you've been complicit in your own suffering. None of this feels like ascending into higher consciousness. It feels like the ground opening beneath you. It feels like everything stable becoming uncertain. It feels like losing the comfortable story you've been telling about your life and standing in the uncomfortable truth of what your life actually is. But Jung found that this discomfort is temporary while the expansion is permanent. Every filter you remove gives you access to more reality. Every truth you face frees up energy that was being used to avoid it. Every illusion you release creates space for something genuine to take its place. And gradually, the person who keeps choosing consciousness over comfort develops a capacity for reality that changes everything about how they move through the world. They make better decisions because they're working with complete information. They form deeper connections because they're not performing. They experience genuine peace because it's based on truth rather than avoidance. Jung would emphasize that this choice isn't made once. It's made daily, hourly, in every moment where comfort and truth are pulling in different directions. The colleague who asks how you're doing, and you have to choose between the automatic fine and something more honest. The relationship where you have to choose between maintaining the status quo and addressing what you've been avoiding. The mirror where you have to choose between seeing who you want to be and seeing who you actually are right now. Each choice seems small, but Jung observed that these accumulated choices determine the entire frequency of a person's life. People who consistently choose comfort remain at the same frequency indefinitely. People who consistently choose consciousness elevate continuously. Here's what Jung ultimately understood about genuine vibrational elevation that the spiritual marketplace will never teach you. It doesn't come from adding spiritual practices to an unexamined life. It comes from examining your life so thoroughly that the practices become unnecessary. It doesn't come from reaching upward toward light and transcendence. It comes from reaching downward into shadow, suffering, and truth, and discovering that the depth you've been avoiding is where your real power lives. It doesn't come from feeling good. It comes from feeling everything, including what's painful and uncomfortable and threatening to your existing identity. The 5 things Jung identified: reclaiming your shadow, withdrawing projections, dismantling your persona, embracing necessary suffering, and choosing consciousness over comfort, are not separate practices. They're 5 dimensions of one fundamental shift: the movement from performing a life to actually living one, from broadcasting a manufactured frequency to vibrating at your authentic one, from managing reality to facing it. Each one feeds the others. When you reclaim shadow material, projections naturally withdraw. When you dismantle your persona, you gain the strength to face necessary suffering. When you embrace that suffering, consciousness becomes a natural choice rather than a terrifying one. And the frequency that emerges from this integrated transformation is something no affirmation or morning routine could ever produce. It's not a manufactured high. It's a fundamental reorganization of how you relate to yourself, to others, and to reality. Jung would tell you it won't look the way you expected. It won't feel like floating above your problems. It'll feel like standing firmly inside your own life for the first time, seeing everything clearly, hiding nothing, performing nothing, and discovering that the person who remains when all the masks come off vibrates at a frequency you didn't know you were capable of. That frequency is what Jung spent his entire career trying to help people access, not through shortcuts or spiritual technology, through the slow, demanding, transformative work of becoming psychologically honest, of becoming whole, of becoming real. If you're willing to do these 5 things, not understand them, not agree with them, but actually do them. You won't need anyone to tell you your vibration has shifted. You'll feel it in every cell of your body, and everyone around you will feel it too, even if they can't name what changed, because authenticity doesn't announce itself. It radiates, and that radiation is the only vibration worth raising. And if you're done understanding these ideas and ready to actually do them, to sit with your shadow, face what you've been filtering out, and find out who's left when the performance stops, that's what the True Self-Discovery Guide was built for. 24 exercises to help you start the work Jung described. It's in the description whenever you're ready to begin.